I already know a couple of guys also joining the session today, so I think it's quite interesting to have all of us here to have this discussion and then look at how beneficial they become, even as we progress in our field. I think that for quite some time now, if not past, but I think as of today, one of the things that we have really been struggling to really understand in terms of what it offers the world is the data idea. And I think it has really proven beyond every reasonable doubt that humanity has a lot to learn, because the things that we do expect to happen like around us all goes back to us having to solve a fundamental problem, and that has to do with the data that we are collecting or gathering. I think data analytics in this simplest context is to enable us to fully have that level of autonomy or control over the single sources of the data that we are gathered in whichever form that they are in. It is quite interesting to also note that over the years, we keep spending so much into like gathering this data, and then the irony is that we are also not really getting the value that we are looking for in this case. So this particularly is interesting because, for example, there are cases of certain applications that we do have in the world now, and there are others that we are still expecting to have in the world. But basically, the challenge is like has to do with which data to go with and where can we even gather those data. So I do remember that earlier today I was speaking to some students. I mentioned that they wouldn't be in a position to really enforce that idea that they are data scientists, they are machine learning engineers, or data analysts, or any professional title that they can go with, and that they should be given so much money to at the end of the month. But what will really mean in the future, we'll be looking at what investments or what returns are we getting for all the investment that we have made into data for the past years. And accordingly, we do have this happening around us almost all the time. So it makes it quite interesting that everybody tries to come into the field, like looking at the data science field or data in particular, how it has grown over the years up to now, and how people really want to have interest in just trying to see what benefits it goes back to them. In many sense, the traditional data analytics that we know all had to do with, I can just put a questionnaire online that I'm doing a master's program at any university, and then I need some pieces of information for that study, design my questionnaire and have my objectives and everything stated. So I just put it online. I want someone to fill it for me. But the interesting thing is that I'll have a lot of people to fill them for me. So I'm filling it 5 times, so I'm filling it 10 times. And all of these observations, I take them, and then I do expect that I'm able to use this data that I've gathered to answer all these questions that I have set for myself or for that study that I'm doing. And at the end of the day, I'm able to meet my time, I'm able to meet the target, I get this resource done, submitted, and I get my degree from that. Now, this reality also differ from what we see in the world, because in the world, we are not going to have that. So in the academic setting, you have made a mistake, in the first place by trying to allow every group of people. Because sometimes you see somebody writing a paper that expects that people who are filling the questionnaire should be experts, or people who have some domain expertise in their field, and if they end up having it's being put on online, everybody can just look at it and then decide to fill it, and then yes, we get those data to work with. So the presentation goes, everything goes on like that is fine, like we're done. The paper gets to go away, and that's okay. But that is not what the modern data science or data analytics tell us. The modern data analytics is quite interesting because the setting within which we are using these data do expect that we should be able to have identified enough features or information that will help us to make a very broader decision or a better decision going forward. So if the data that being collected are not that significant to help us in the decisions that we may want to take and all of that, then it becomes a problem going forward. So now the challenge is that we are finding ourselves in a space where, one, we need to now invest a lot of resources into gathering more data, because that's in its way will help us to know the objectives for which the organization needs to find itself in. And secondly, we also need to collect the data so that they are able to solve the problem that we were trying to solve. Because one thing is that in this data analytics era, there has been series of new technologies that has also been growing from this. And one of these is machine learning systems. Now, these machine learning systems are talking about designing these systems such that your system will be reliable, will be scalable, and adaptable enough to stand the test of time. So that means that if we gather so much data, we should be able to use data to build systems that will continue to perform the correct functions at the desired level of performance, even in the face of adversity. So that means if we have even a software or hardware problem, or even a human problem, this system should be able to stand the test of time. Now I'm going to give you some example, because I do know that we do have several of these things around us, and now they makes life quite simpler. So we see them every day and we try to understand whether there has been a problem to what we see. Now I have this image here. I knew that some of us will look at it well. Yeah. There is a problem with the second, or say the first one is normal because we see them every day, and then they are the problem that we come across. But the second one, there's a problem that we are finding it difficult to understand. Now, the interpretation has been done correctly, because we do see that there is some text that we can read and understand. But the text in itself also possesses a lot of challenge, because we are also now trying to understand what the text really means. So the challenge is that it is very easy to identify from the perspective of maybe somebody who uses data for natural language, or somebody who's working as a data analyst or data scientist, to know that this, of course, means there's a problem with the translation. So the language maybe in India has not been properly translated, and that is what is causing the problem here. But it is quite also easier for, like I said, someone to also read this and be able to come to consensus that there has been something that has been translated properly. So the bottom line, like trying to put across is that we are at a point where several of the things that we want to do are not being done easily or properly because of the challenge that we have with data. So certainly, we may want to learn about all the right techniques that will give us the opportunity to collect data and then collect data that really fulfills the kind of problem that we want to solve. Then also we have something very peculiar around us, and that has to do with whether or not we can really build this system to solve the problem that humanity have. Because in one way, one day we just woke up and all our applications on Google are not running. So Google search is not working, Google Maps are not working. And then we start thinking about how do we also build applications on time so that as Africans, we also have an easy way to solve our problems that are existing online. But the problem also is that these systems can be failing us even at any point, because even as we build the systems, they become much more broader and a lot of problems will come later. So my presentation, I'm just going to look at us trying to solve a problem, and there's a problem that I want us to solve. So I will need the input of everybody, especially for this particular one. Now, for every data analytics, our goal is to be able to use it within the business by trying to solve a problem directly or indirectly. So if it is about, let's say we want to increase our sales directly, then we want to increase it such a way that our conversion rate becomes higher, or we can reduce the cost that is involved in doing business. Now, indirectly, we expect that our customers should be satisfied with whatever we are giving them. And we should also be able to spend so much time even on our website. So they are doing so much on the same site, and that's very interesting. So that's okay to do. Now, today, one of the biggest problems that we have is that we are trying to deal with fake news, or we are trying to deal with items that are around the world and they are causing so much pain to us. So we see them every day. Yesterday, one interesting thing that happened in Ghana was after our budget was read, there was a news that the new directive comes that nobody should pay toll. And so that information went so quickly that everyone went to the toll, and then they were not paying for anything because they said we shouldn't pay. So nobody will pay. And of course, there are nobody in there at the toll booths to also collect those monies. And then that was a good day for our friends and drivers who would take us to work and every day. Okay, so assuming that in as much as the world has become, significant thing that we want to do on, let's say, GLab is to try as much as possible to give the science community in Ghana a better view of what they can contribute to the world. But then at the same time, let's say that we want to build some sort of a ranking system that will help us in the news that we feed to our people. But then we've got three important goals that we want to achieve. One of these goals is that we want to minimize the spread of misinformation. And secondly, we also want to maximize revenue from the sponsored content. And then thirdly, we also want to maximize engagement on our platforms. Good. Now, this is the problem that we have. Our goals are going to be achieved, but let's put this goal in order of how we want them to be achieved. So Gamli, if we have these three goals that we want to achieve, and you are supposed to put them in order of preference, how they are, you want them to be achieved, which one would you want to go first, second, or third? And then any other lady can also add her voice to it.
Am I to go first?
Yeah.
I'll go for maximize engagement.
Okay, then the other ones.
And then after that, minimize spread of information, and then maximize
information.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the order you want to go. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I can see Deborah here. Deborah, hi. What will be your order? Okay, Deborah is not around.
Yeah, sorry, I had to.
2, 3, 1. Okay. Okay, 2, 3, 1. That is maximize revenue, and then maximize engagement, and also the minimize misinformation. Does anyone else want to add? One more person. 2, 1, 3. Let's maximize revenue from sponsored ad, and then minimize misinformation, and then maximize engagements. Joshua also went 1, 3, 2. Okay. So 1, 3, 2, 1. Bright 1, 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's interesting. Okay. I think that it's also fair enough for us to know that around us in this current dispensation, we found ourselves in several problems, and one of the biggest problems that we have today is misinformation, like I mentioned earlier. Now, in our setting where education is quite difficult to, be accessed by a lot of people, and even the few who are educated still have a challenge with understanding many of these concepts. We get to see that misinformation has become one of the biggest challenges. That is what we see around us, and it's so common with us that it's really eating us up. But on the other side, in their Gamli is a socialist. In the capitalist room, the idea is not the same, because sometimes maximizing engagement or spreading misinformation get to have a price. And this price tends to be very, very important to some of these organizations, and they see them as a benefit. And many of these things, we have seen them are around us in some time now. We've seen a lot of whistleblowing going around the likes of the Facebook or even Apple and some other organizations, or even the Chinese organization. And this tend to also put us in a corner that at what level are we comfortable to have issues being addressed, because in a wider scope, we are doing these analytics, we are doing this data because we want to solve the problems of humanity. And so we should be able to have the goal of that. But that is not what we are seeing. And so for every goal, there has to be specific objectives how we can use to achieve those goals. So these are very broader goals, but the point is, what effort are we going to use to get to these ones? And that is where specifics has to come in. And so if we want to maximize user engagement, would we need to filter out spam or filter out content that are out of the range of the ones that we don't want people to also see? Or would you want to also rank posts by engagement? So how likely users will click on? And an example is what I was talking about yesterday's case of posting about suspension of or abolition or scrapping off of toll to be paid by Ghanaians and or road users. And that news is quite going to be interesting because most everybody will try to read that content to see what really is about. But the other thing is, if this happens, what does it mean also to filtering out those that are also fake news and those that are also what? Not fake, but they may promote so many vices on our side of the story. Now, maximizing the user's engagement while minimizing the spread of extreme views and misinformation will also mean that we now have to filter out misinformation and then rank posts by quality. Now, the question is, of all these objectives, how do we achieve them? Or how are we able to achieve these goals that we have set? Because one, if we try to rank posts by quality, that means that we also have a problem with objective 5, which is about ranking the rank post by engagement. So the probability that we are able to have more news that are containing extreme views and even misinforming people, having more clicks, just as we see on certain social media platforms, are high. But if this is our objectives here correctly, we are on the right path to solve problems. But how is that going to help us in solving problems? Deborah is telling about, can imagine that's going on, and Germany is currently reporting increasing number in recent times, and possibly there might be another lockdown. Oh, that's interesting. So we find ourselves in another fix, trying to solve this problem. The other thing is, how do we able to combine these objectives? Like I said, how do we able to combine these objectives, knowing very well that these tend to have effect on also the other objectives that we have set out to get it done, right? So first of all, bringing back to the data that I was speaking about, I think that we are very comfortable now to speak about 57 million messages across all messaging apps every second around the world. We are talking about millions of tweets happening every minute around the world. We are talking about thousands and 100,000s of things happening around us. But the question also is, how does it go to also help in solving society problems? And at what end can we be able to solve problems that arises from these extremism and things around us? And that comes back to us as scientists. What efforts can we put in place to minimize some of these challenges that we are seeing today? Yes, of course, we have constraints to solve them, but it is not supposed to be something that we expect to have it with ease, because people do have us as being the solution to some of these problems. And so it comes back to us to be able to present to the world the things that are of quality and of use to us. Now, on the individual front also, I think that will be the last thing I want to speak about, has to do with how data that we see around us help us to also deal with the things that we can deal with today. And I think that today, one of the platforms that we all use to kind of understand the quality of people that we are working with and then how they are affecting our lives has to do with LinkedIn. Now, it is one way to assess on times the things that are around us, and also to objectively be able to support them in terms of how they can affect our own lives. But also it's also important that we also understand in simple case how we can also help others to solve their challenges that are around them. Luckily for us in this century, on time that we find ourselves, data collection has really evolved, and there are now several ways that we are using to gather so much data. And then it has really helped us in making systems that are very efficient around us, and we are really enjoying those times, really. One of those is using the smartphone to work, and also working with the smartphone, either in the storing our data in the cloud or using it on the edge. So on the edge, for example, we have really found like an interesting time, because now we have good, let me say, phones, good laptops that can store up to a maximum level of data. Some time ago, we couldn't store a lot of data, but today we can do a lot of them because our edge can really contain a lot of things. One of the phones that was launched by Apple, for example, the iPhone 13 could store data up to even 1 terabyte. And that is an interesting revolution we have found ourselves in. On the cloud, we can save a lot of data also. And that is all contributing to what we are very successfully about. But that is not all of the things that we want to see, because in one way, we tend to all have problems when certain things don't go right with us. One of the things that we have seen, even the application of data, has to do with ensuring that there is that kind of edge for everybody, all of us who uses the smartphone, all of us who have access to all of these devices are all given equal opportunities. And that is something that we are not seeing much around us that we can have problems of, or can have problems with. The other thing is that we are not also seeing so much of our own involvement in these cases. I think even though we are known to be very late adopters of technology and all the tools, all the skills that we are supposed to be learning to get ourselves ready for most of the challenges or the opportunities that comes later with it. But also we should be able to have ourselves positioned most of the time to be taking up some of the challenges that come very early, because we wouldn't want to be waiting for things to be done properly somewhere before we become a party to it. Like, we should be able to see things happen and then being a party to how these things are supposed to happen, as they go a long way to affect the way we also do our things around the world. Also, the last thing that has to do with this challenge has to do with at what level are we comfortable to say that we can use analytics to solve our own problems and that they wouldn't kind of pose any challenge to us in the future. And then I think this is where the issue of interpretation comes in, or explainability comes in, because many of the applications that we want to see in the world at the moment are difficult to explain it all by itself because of the nature of how they are. And this is where we will need to have a lot of engagement. We need to have a lot of research to be done. We need to have a lot of things done properly to help us to do so. And that is one of the things that my role at Mills Connect is supposed to be. So Mills is just about the lab, mission-driven labs. Our motive is to help raise a number of Africans who are able to understand research science and use data to solve problems in the future. The goal is quite big, obviously, but we do hope that we'll be able to fast run a lot of engagement with some stakeholders and even some of our friends here who in one way or the other will help us in molding and then getting things done swiftly. This is where I'll end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Derek. Does someone have like a specific question for him in light of his presentation that maybe they will want to be addressed immediately? Well, if not, I'll just ask you, Derek, from your own point of view, the questions that you give to us, how would you rank them and why?
Okay, I think personally, I'm kind of much more interested in seeing the things done properly. I think my biggest motive will be to see, like, if I have to rank them right now in their own states now. Misinformation is quite an important thing to me, because I don't want people to be misinformed, because I've already been misinformed for generations. It makes a lot of things quite difficult for a lot of people. Engagement is another thing that I will look at. That's my second thing before I even think about the maximization of anything profitable. So yeah, that is the order I'll go.
Okay, interesting. So you're probably more of a socialist than me then. I would just hand over to our second speaker for today, Emmanuel, to share with us what he has for us about this topic of getting started with data analytics. Emmanuel, over to you.
When I first got the invite to talk on this topic, I generally went into my overthinking mood, trying to think about what's the possible best path to becoming anyone who were able, like the best possible path to get into a career in data science. And I decided to go with the simplest thing possible. Now, most advice out there tend to be just about people's opinions. And in fact, most advice in nature tends to be about people's opinion. So when someone does something and it works for them, they tend to generalize and think that that would work for everyone. And so they recommend it as advice. So then my approach for this talk, stemming from that assumption, was to deviate slightly from it. What if we could have a way to get advice from the entire data science community using the data science process itself? So my talk is going to be, my talk is going to take that approach. So typically, I hope you can all see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. So typically, if someone wants to start a career in data science, you'd go into Google and type in, what do I need to learn to be a data scientist, or something similar. And from my experience, that's from my experience, it's super important. You're going to hear a lot of it. And in fact, I'll get to the reason why I'll keep stressing that term or terms similar to it. Now, from my experience, you would usually get websites like medium.com, where people write articles about data science or data analytics or machine learning, or any of the million derivatives that fall under data-driven decision making. And then there is Quora, where people exchange questions and answers. And then there is dev.to. Now, I know the first two are probably the most common ones on this list. There are others like Reddit. There are other blogs around that you could read. So what if we can get advice from these platforms using a data-driven approach? What this will require is for us to pull some data. In the case of Medium, published articles. In the case of Quora, some questions and answers. And in the case of dev.to, some articles. What if we could pull some data and try to study the common themes with respect to the advice that people give to beginners getting started in data science? What if we could do that? Well, the good news is we actually can. So we are going to do just that. Now, unfortunately for us, medium.com and Quora.com do not have public APIs for pulling content from their sites, especially content with regard to Medium posts in terms of Medium, and Quora content with regard to questions and answers. Now, you could circumvent that by scraping the data and trying to work with that. But then if you check their robots.txt files, the files which specify what exactly you can get from those websites, it's strictly stated not to do it. So it's illegal. At this point, the geek in me was pushing just to go for the data, but then since this is a public forum, it's just better I stay away from all legalities. Fortunately for us, dev.to has a public API where we could pull data from and then use this data for analysis. So I did exactly just that. So what did I do? Okay, but first of all, this is some of the articles on dev.to. So introduction to data science, introduction to machine learning, introduction to machine learning and scikit-learn, types of machine learning, notes of machine learning. And you could see that all this content seemed to be tailored towards beginners. So if you watch critically, under the titles of each article, you could see the hashtags related to the content that this article is deemed to belong to. So in the first one, where you see introduction to data science, you could see hashtag data science, then machine learning, then Python, then beginners, right? So that makes our work easier. What we do is to take these hashtags and pull all data in that category. And we assume that all data in that category with beginners, Python, machine learning would have some beginner content, which we can analyze to derive insights for how to get started with data analytics. So again, we did just that, right? So with that said, I decided to really go hard on the API. I got 1 million data points from the dev.to API, which is essentially 1 million articles in that category. Then as part of every data science pipeline, the first thing you do when you get the data is to do some basic cleaning, and then we extract insights. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the basic cleaning, but then basically, since this is text data, you generally want to remove punctuations, remove weird characters, check if the data coming in is in the language you want, in our case, English. Then you would want to remove stem words, then you would want to tokenize. Then depending on what exact insight you want to extract, you take it from there. So what I've mentioned so far seem to be like a good base for doing any kind of NLP analysis, which is natural language processing analysis. But I'm going to do something very simple here. In this case, now we have 1 million data points. What I would want to do is I would want to see the recurring theme among the various topics that I think are relevant to an introductory course in data science. So the simplest approach to doing that, I mean, just having a bird's eye view of the data, would be to have a word cloud. Now, the diagram on the left just takes all the text data, which is the articles that I've extracted. And then based on the frequency of the text, I mean, the frequency of the text in the data determines the size of that word, determines the size of the word in the word cloud displayed on the right. So here, you could see that a lot of the data contains words like full screen, exit, enter. Then right away, we know we have a problem because full screen mode, enter full screen mode, exit full screen is something that I do not expect to be part of articles for introduction in data science. In fact, even if there are articles in introduction in data, if there are words in articles in introduction to data science, I don't expect them to be the most dominant words in our corpus. So immediately I know my data is still dirty. My cleaning was not enough. So I have to go back to the data and then try to clean it a bit and then see if we could get some better insights. And then hooray, it turns out that what we had on the screen, full screen modes, were HTML components from the page. From the page. And unfortunately for us, the dev.to API was returning this. So after cleaning it a bit, you could see the various components that's popping out. We could clearly see Python, the data, then code, then a lot of Python statements such as print, method, function, and anyone familiar with Python would immediately see parts of the language in this word cloud, which is a good thing. So it tells us that a lot of the beginner articles in data science and data analytics and ML talk about Python in some way. So we can frame Python and just hang it in our room as we continue to do further testing. So then the next thing is, if it comes to Python, like my next question in exploring this data is, if I take Python, what are some of the things that people talk about with respect to the language? And this word cloud reveals even more detailed Python stuff. So you could see class methods, you could see the function declaration, and a lot of other interesting things when it comes to the language, which goes to confirm our initial hypothesis that a lot of people talk about Python. Now, the next thing we want to know is machine learning. What exactly are people talking about with respect to machine learning, data science and analytics from the data? A quick word cloud of our data reveals that people talk about model a lot. And that makes sense, right? Models are the central themes in all of data science and data analytics and machine learning. Then you can, surprisingly, actually, I realized that a lot of people talk about image. Now, image is strictly a construct of computer vision. So I didn't expect it to be this dominant. I knew we would see it in the data, but I didn't expect it to be this dominant. Then to proceed, you could see other things like NumPy, you could see columns talking about data frames, then you could see machine learning, and a lot of other interesting stuff that I expect to be in the article. This just gives me a bird's eye view of the kind of things to tell you to study. I can draft a whole document from this talking about what the community is talking about. But again, this is very insufficient to draw any good conclusions. In fact, to even make the analysis better, there are further questions we can ask, such as, does this advice change over time? The data collected was collected over a period of, for articles written over a period of 3 years. So we could break the article down per year and see the kind of things people talk about every year and see if that has evolved. So that's a good question we could explore. Then another question we could explore is, what does the community think about each article? And how do we get the community's thoughts on each article? We check the comment section. Now, if we take data from Reddit, it's obviously going to come with a lot of rude comments, but for dev.to, usually people give constructive comments. So from that, we could do a basic sentiment analysis. We could build a sentiment analysis model to determine the sentiment of people towards this article. Then number 3, which article is best to recommend to a beginner? This is quite an interesting question, especially because of the word best. Generally, in science, if you say something is best, you need a lot of proof to back it up. So let me just take it easy on that word. Let's say, which article is most likely to help a beginner the most? How we can go about answering that question would be to probably collect people's reactions on the article, maybe collect the reputation of the writer. We can use the upvotes that they get to rank their reputation, or we could build some form of a language model to determine the quality of their writing, or we could do 1 in a million stuff just to try to answer that question. Then following that question, we could answer the question, what is the reputation of the writer? Now, scientifically, this is a wrong way to judge the quality of someone's work. because all work should be judged on merit. But again, for this case, the reputation is useful. I mean, the reputation would not do much harm because we have an entire community looking over the work. And if there is a good correlation between the community's acceptance of the work and the author's work, then maybe we could assume that there is a little bit of signal there that could help a beginner. Then the final question that I thought about answering was, does the reputation affect the sentiment expressed by the community? So for example, if you are someone who writes a lot and a lot of people know you, are they likely to accept your work more? Due to lack of time, I couldn't answer all of these questions because I just quickly put this together over the past few hours. These are interesting things that could further go on to boost the answer to the question, how can you get started in data science? So let's revert back to the question. What are the insights that we extracted from the basic analysis we were able to do? We saw a lot of things with regard to models. So obviously we have to learn how to build a model. Then there was a lot of content about Python programming language. So we probably have to learn the Python programming language. Then libraries such as Pandas, NumPy, and Matplotlib were very dominant in our web cloud. So it's probably something that you would want to learn as well. But this is not the main thing I would want you to take away from this talk. Preachers usually say that do as I say, not as I do. But this is the sharp opposite in science. You should do as I do, not as I say. If you want evidence, you have to observe critically. So then, the important thing I would want you to take away from this is how I actually did this analysis. That is how you get into data science. What are the relevant skills needed to do a basic analysis like this? That's the main import of what I'm talking, like, of this talk. So what are the things you need? Before I even get into the things you need, let me get into the things that I see recommended a lot that I disagree with. The main thing I hear or I read is people are told to take courses. Take a Coursera course, take a Udemy course. Those courses in and of themselves would not help you get into data analysis. Especially if you are going to work in industry. If you are going to work in industry, the main thing you have to do is to build stuff. And the relevant skills required to build stuff at the barest minimum as follows. I think the number one thing you have to learn is how to get data. When I started my first machine learning role, I spent an entire month trying to get the data from one database to another, not even to the point of cleaning, just creating a data lake and trying to create a connection between company A's database and our database. And that seemed to be something that was so important to the company. In this analysis, however, I worked with public APIs. I just had to tap into the APIs and then get the data into some format that I could work with. So the number one thing you have to learn is how to get the data, because if you don't have data, I mean, you can't do any form of analysis. And to get the data, you either get the data from a database or you get it from API. So you should learn how to work with APIs and how to interact with databases. This is the point where people would advise you to learn SQL. But I didn't put it there because it's an advice all over the internet. So, I mean, you could put it under working with APIs. Then asking good questions. At the heart of all of science, of which data science is included, is the ability to ask good questions. And someone will ask, so Emmanuel, what is a good question? Well, a good question, first of all, has to be unambiguous. So an approximately good question is how to get into data science. An even better question is, what are the skills required to get into data science? Then an even better question after you discover one of the skills, which is Python, is how to start Python programming language. How to learn Python programming language. So learning to ask good questions is extremely important. Then one way to actually get to asking good questions is to ask what ifs a lot. Most progress will generally be made by people who ask what if, because we have a tendency to just assume that things are the way they are. But the more what ifs you can ask, the higher your chances of chancing on something novel. And if you're exploring data, you would actually want novel things. So asking a lot of what ifs is very useful. Then the second one, which is, I mean, the third in this submission, but the second on the page, which is, I actually made a mistake. So questions whose answers are testable. I mean, that's at the heart of all of science. In fact, not only that, but questions which are testable in and of themselves as well. Then the usual things that everyone says you should learn. You should learn R, learn Python. If you ask me, I would say you should learn Python. In fact, once you know Python, you can easily learn R in a few hours. And then at the core of all of this is linear algebra, basic calculus, and basic statistics. Now, let me be quick to stress that the mathematics part, this linear algebra, basic calculus, and basic statistics do not apply in academia. In academia, you need to be well-grounded in linear algebra, well-grounded in optimization methods. In fact, the more you know your mathematics, the better, because in academia, you're at the tip of knowledge and you're trying to push the boundaries. So you would want to know more. But then my guess is most people here are focused on industry. So this would be the barest minimum. Okay. So now, remember at the beginning of my presentation, I kept on saying that from my knowledge, you will check Cora, from my knowledge, you check Dev2. And you could also remember that when I did my first word cloud, when I saw full screen, I knew something was wrong with the data. The only reason I knew those two things was because, or the only reason I was able to get to the heart of those two things was because I have domain knowledge in what is expected of a beginner in data science. One mistake that people make is to think that technical skills is the most important thing in data science. I beg to differ. I think the best data scientists are people with domain knowledge who are learning data skills to apply to whatever domain that they are working in. So if you ask me, if I'm to give you my opinion about how to go about this, especially if you do not have a typical math or computer science background, would be to really make sure you know your domain knowledge. I know this would this falls in line with what most of you are doing, like lawyers who would probably want to apply machine learning to law, public health practitioners who would want to apply various data analytics skills to their work, and maybe social scientists who would want to analyze social phenomena with machine learning. So if you're grounded in domain knowledge, in fact, with even the word cloud, if you have good enough domain knowledge and you know Excel enough, you should be able to do everything I've done in that analysis without coding. So it shows you how much domain knowledge is important. Then the next thing which you should cultivate is the ability to ask good questions. For each word cloud that I displayed, each word cloud that I displayed stemmed from a question I asked. At the end of all the word clouds, I asked 5 questions. If I had explored those questions, I would get even further insights as to what the data science world is saying about learning data science. So your ability to cultivate the habit of asking good questions is extremely important. In terms of industry, people don't hire you to build models. People don't hire you to come clean data. People don't hire you to get data. People hire you to solve business problems. So the first order of business is to understand the business. The second order of business is to know the lowest hanging fruits to tap into to bring value to the business. And you can only do that second thing by asking good questions. Then, of course, the normal thing, which is programming, and then you need some mathematics to survive. Okay. So in conclusion, someone would ask, Emmanuel, how does this apply to me? I'm not a teacher, so I'm not using data science to learn how to learn data science. Well, it turns out, fortunately, there are several applications of data for decision making. I know there are several applications in health, several applications in business, telecommunication. I'm yet to know a field which does not apply data science as things stand now. So there are applications of data science for everyone. The best way to actually get into the field is to look at your own field, Google the challenges faced in the field, and start learning very specific things towards solving that problem. By the time you get to the end of that first project, you would have a project to show to recruiters. It will make you unique in your field because not a lot of your colleagues would be using data in doing what they're supposed to do. Most fields are still very new to application of data. And then you would end up learning a whole lot more than you would if you just take an online course or a bunch of online courses. Thank you. I'm happy to discuss any questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Emmanuel. That was a very fantastic presentation. And I quite like the balance. So Derek started with the general idea of data, why is it important, and the relevance of data in solving problems. There were a number of philosophical questions, and then Emmanuel took over with a more practical perspective, yet at the same time use an explorative approach in order to give his advice. So I think that's those were 2 really great presentations. So yes, at this point, we'll open up for any questions, comments, suggestions, and discussions that would want to raise. Kindly use the raise hand feature to indicate your willingness to talk, and then I will call you. And also feel free to also type your questions in the chat if you want it to be read on your behalf, or because you've typed the questions in the chat, I will then invite you to ask. So at this point, I would like to invite Deborah. I think Deborah had some comments after Derek's initial presentation. If Deborah would like to highlight or expand on some of the things that she was saying that I think we missed it at that point.
You really caught me on the spot. I didn't see that coming. Anyway, no, so I was just saying that I think with the problem or issue with ethics or data in ethics, it's really an important area of research. First of all, when you want to build models that could be ethical, models that can be fair, sort of meaning that they do not discriminate against any marginalized group, or probably give wrong results to someone else who is underrepresented in the data set you're working with. To some extent, you tend to deal with balancing with accuracy, because most industries are interested in coming up with models that are going to give them very high accuracies. And so they do not take into consideration what are the measures they can put in place to ensure that these models that they have, though they're giving me good accuracy, they're actually representing or doing the right thing or what I wanted to do. They just focus on getting the good models and then using it on the people. The second thing too is that I think generally, I think Derek also spoke about it with regard even Ima with regards to getting access to data. Yes, there are places where you can get data sets from, but the question sometimes with regards to where we get our data sets even from is that you don't actually know how was this data set collected. Is this data set actually even a good representation of what you want to use it for? So for helping to eradicate or help minimize this issue of misrepresentation of information and everything, we need to still get back to the drawing table, start from how do we actually collect the data from the beginning, like what are we trying to model, what are the factors or things we need to collect, the like what are the main features we should look out for, and what should be the size of our data. These are all things that you'd have to discuss, not just as a data scientist, as a machine learning engineer. You'd still need like everyone involved, people with domain expertise, what their ideas are, people even without expertise in the area, they all have to come in to give in their ideas so you can ensure that this whole process you're doing is actually right. But aside that, there still remains the problem that even we humans ourselves, we are biased. I mean, you don't have a human being who probably sometimes we believe we have stereotypes. You believe that this person is this way. And so let's say you are giving out a loan to someone and you are the loan officer. When someone comes in to ask for the loan, you look at the person and then there are certain things that you are looking out for. Once the person has them, then you give out the loan. If the person doesn't, you won't give the loan to the person. But at the end, we collect all of these things and we say, this is the data sets we have and this is what we are working with. And so you build your models and they would still deploy these models. So at the end, we are only amplifying the bias that is already in existence in the data sets. So this whole area, it raises a lot of questions, a lot of things. Like everyone needs to like get involved, whether you are into data, you're not into data, whatever it is, you really need to like get involved. That's what I wanted to say. But aside that, Emmanuel, I think I really liked your approach of the entire presentation, starting from picking how you got access to data, did some analysis on it. At least it gives any beginner a good view of some of the beautiful things you can do when you have the technical skills and all of that. So I don't know, big ups, your presentation was good, as well as Derek too. I love the presentation. And Derek, I think I'll get in touch later. We can talk more on the area of ethics, because it's an area I'm interested in too as well. So yeah, that's just the contribution I wanted to add. But Camille, you got me on the spot. I didn't see that coming.
Sorry, I don't know if you heard me, but yeah, I saw your comment, so I really wanted you to bring it up for discussion, and thank you for your extensive inputs. For those who don't know, Deborah is a lecturer and she's a researcher, so it makes it quite interesting to also like offer additional perspectives onto this topic. I think that it's great. Thank you very much. There's a question from someone in the chat. So SOH, would you like to ask your question? So is that okay? Let me just ask on their behalf. So the question says, in your last slide, so that must be Emmanuel, you talk about machine learning. Please walk us through how machine learning has bearing on data analytics. So yeah, Emmanuel.
So I'll get to the question, but for some reason, I just can't turn on my camera.
Sorry about that. Let me see what I can do for myself. I guess you can still question in the
Yeah. Okay, so data science is the science. Okay, so data analytics. First of all, let me just declare this. The whole data community has a huge problem when it comes to nomenclature. We mix a lot of names for things, so the lines are quite blurry. But I would say that the science of working with data is data science. So everything that falls in the category of working with any form of data would fall under data science. Then data analytics would be, I think the term data analytics is mostly used when you describe the application of data in industry. So kind of like analysis on data for some insight. Then machine learning is the application of mathematical methods to get insights from data. So you can see data science as the broad umbrella, with machine learning and data analytics as semicircles in there. I don't know if that is clear. So machine learning is basically a subset of data science.
Okay, thank you, Emmanuel. That's another question. That's Harry, who has raised his hand to ask a question. Can you please go ahead?
Yeah, hi guys, great presentation. Yeah, sorry I came in a little late, but I have had questions on my mind regarding people who generally work with data, but maybe to some extent are not analyzing them itself, but I want to understand the whole policy around people who generally work with data. I don't know if you can share with me or to others who may be interested, maybe policy regarding data on the continent, especially for people maybe who are building health tech solutions or any form of solutions with some level of compliance. My question.
Sorry, it appears that there were some breaks in your question. So can you please ask again? If I understood you correctly, you were asking about whether there are recommendations for good
recommendations
practices when it comes to data handling.
Yeah, and maybe policies to look out for, especially for those who are maybe aggregating data using maybe health tech solutions or some apps, and how things play around in those areas.
Okay. Yeah. Emmanuel or Derek, please, do you have any thoughts on this question?
I don't understand the policy framework for data across Africa. I know South Africa, for example, does not allow the export of data in finance and healthcare outside the country, hence the Amazon data center they have here. I know Rwanda also has a few laws in that regard, but I don't know about Ghana. I mean, I think generally Deborah is the best person to answer this question. So, and Derek, yeah, I don't have enough details in that regard.
Okay, so I think let's go to Derek before Deborah so that she doesn't think that we are intentionally putting her on the spot today.
Okay, I think that one of the things that we can be looking at for is the fact that I mentioned earlier that most of the time when it comes to the data that we are collecting, and especially in an academic setting.
Eric, can you please turn on your camera again if possible?
Okay, yeah, I think you can see me now.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I earlier mentioned that most of the time when we are collecting data, especially for the academic setting, because our objectives is most centered around developing state-of-the-art models on like some sort of a benchmark data set. We don't tend to be focusing so much on other issues that comes out of that. But in the real world, when we practically need to collect the data, like those ones have so much issues to do, like privacy and regulatory concerns. And I think it's fair enough to bring it in here because I have had some encounter with some PhD students from overseas, and most of the questions that are centered around like in our case where we don't have practically anything like a framework that is guiding what we're doing, like AI frameworks and all of that we see in other countries. Like, how are we able to make sure that we're able to stay within the limits and then not use data in other jurisdictions that can cause any harm to the user or even the company itself. And I think that one of the things that I remember sharing with them was the fact that, we don't necessarily need to be having these frameworks around you to be able to know within the limit which you are supposed to go, because I think in as much as possible, every team that works on a data project mostly relies most of the time on the advice of the technical persons or the technical like domain guys who most of the time can come from any field, like can have a legal practitioner or a medical practitioner and all of those guys. The idea is that these people will help us to know with what limits are we able to go and what can we actually add to what we are trying to do. So in as much as possible, that should be the guiding principle. And if we don't tend to have those, then that is where we may really be getting ourselves into a lot of troubles and all of that. The other way is that I think that we can open stakeholder engagement to see to what extent should we also try to work such that we don't get to find problems with this kind of data that we are gathering. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Derek, for your submission, for your input. I'd like to know whether, do we have any other questions? I think we've run out of time. Whenever we have a very interesting topic, which is big in size that we have to break down, then we tend to run out of time. And so I think that if you have any other questions or comments, this will be your opportunity to speak up. Okay, Deborah, please, are you ready?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think there was. I'm sorry I missed the question initially. A question about recommendations or good practices or policies when handling data. I think it depends on which part of the world you are in, for what I know, and the nature of data you're working with. So for instance, in Europe, for instance, their data protection laws are really, really like tight, and they take them very serious. It's really hard for you to just pick up data and then not follow laid down procedures on how to get the right procedures to actually get the data set and work with it, and who you can actually give out the data to. And aside that, even if you ask people and take their data, you can only keep it for like a duration. You can't keep it for the entire time, and which means that after that particular duration, you have to do away with it. For Ghana, I know they have this website where they have different data sets, but it's sometimes you go, they put them in different categories. It's you really can't find like good data in any of them. So there's really nothing like in Ghana that you go like, okay, if you have to get data from the source, you have to follow this process. There's nothing like that that I am aware of in Ghana. But I know that they also have policies, but as to how strong these policies are well initiated or implemented, I am not sure about that. But for Europe, I know that they take these things very serious. Aside that, if you're working with other data sets that are already publicly available, there's really no laid down rule as to what to do. Maybe if you use it for a research, you can just cite that you got this data set from Kaggle, you got this data set from Cindy, and that's it, but not to possibly do some other things that I'm aware of. Aside that, I think research typically, I don't know whether it's because sometimes people come up with very complex ideas. Typically would always want to use just like randomly generated data. Sometimes some of them are not like real data sets. They just generate the data sets and then use them. Sometimes not all research, but yeah, that's what people do. And with that, if you randomly generated the data, you just have to say that this is how you got the data set. Aside that, you just give credits to wherever you got the data set or anything. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, Harry.
Yeah, I think really interesting perspectives on that. I was just looking to maybe to see if there are like certain, I mean, how to go to policies that are already in existence that people are conforming to. I mean, especially when people we see a lot of people developing health tech solutions. I mean, just giving a use case, just to understand what is already happening, especially for people who are already doing stuff like that, and just to see if they are conforming to any standards or not. That's why I actually brought this question. But I think I love the contribution so far. Thanks.
Yeah, I think, Harry, the other issue, you know, is has to do with the, I think one of the issues currently being discussed even at the ITU conference in Geneva next month will be on that same thing that you just asked about. You know, some of the things don't happen like there's already a law, or the law has some sort of provisions already made on that, because the thing is that, you know, dealing with the complexity of data itself, and to what scope do we say that we have a limit to these, and then we do expect that we all should be able to fall within that to, solve them is also another thing. If you look at even the GDPR, for example, it's quite something that keeps on being revised most of the time. Unfortunate for our case in Ghana, we are trying to now set up some of these regulatory bodies, like we saw with the Cybersecurity Act being passed. Now we are now trying to resource even the Ghana Data Protection Commission, so that we can now have even centers across the country that they can be able to, kind of interpret most of the things that are being captured in there. So it makes it quite a difficult task at the moment. But like I mentioned earlier, we always have examples to follow. And you and I will possibly agree with me that most of the things that we are practicing as a result of the things that we have seen happen elsewhere. And so we try to replicate, or we try to do some of them here. It is quite important that we first have try as much as possible to consider the ethics, like, so we don't get to have some of these problems coming. And that is one of the things that we can do. But until then, like I said, we can open for further stakeholder engagement while trying to invite other parties, like from other, let's say, industry, trying to give us an advice on what has happened before in this, and how we can also learn lessons from that to go forward.
Thank you very much. So now the final question from Kizito. I think this is really the last question to be considered today. Kizito, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. It's not really a question, it's more of a remark that I have. Because it has to do with policy and frameworks, I would like to think that I am in a position to Sigamali, you asked me to put on my video. Okay, let me see. I'd like to think that I'm in a position to make one or two remarks. I think in broad terms, the Constitution of Ghana is like a motherboard, right? So it's a motherboard, is the framework of all frameworks. So you don't really need to go to great lengths to have an act specifically for data protection or to regulate the issue of data science or whatever happens in our world, because we actually have sufficient regulations in the Constitution to take a look at it, to handle that. When you take a look at the link that Gamali posted, the general data protection, I think, of the EU is just a glorified, expansion of already existing data, rights. So I wouldn't be so much concerned about the fact that we lack any policy framework. I'll be more concerned about the fact that we cannot implement some of these breaches to data rights. Because you take a look at the European sample, and in Article 8, they have remedies, liabilities, and penalties. These are liabilities and penalties that already exist in Ghanaian commerce law and in Ghanaian, civil and criminal proceedings. So we don't need to enact an act specifically for this, unless we have a peculiar interest to protect. So if you have a peculiar interest to protect, then you can go and enact a specific regulation. Other than that, or if you want to do something strategically, if you want to, like what Emmanuel was saying about South Africa, perhaps the South African authorities wanted to attract big corporations to come to their country and set up, local offices. So they are telling you, hey, you are not going to export our data, so you are being forced to come and set up an office there so that they can also boost the economy. If you want to do something like that, fine, then you might need a regulation. But if you just want to regulate for the sake of regulation, then I don't think you need anything, special, because almost every right of individuals and ethics of commerce are already established. You can take if you think line, or in a way, you can take a look at the Chapter 3 of the European example that Gamali posted, all those rights that have been enumerated there, we already have them in Ghana. You can put them in two broad categories: autonomy and the right to privacy, and then maybe the third one, non-malfeasance. We already have those rights. All they did was to enumerate it, you know. So they only enumerated this right. It doesn't mean we don't have them. We have them. They are not enumerated. But if at any point your right to privacy or autonomy is breached, you can go to a court in Ghana to enforce that right. You have the right. You know, it is not enumerated, but you have the right. So we have these rights already existing. If for the purposes of strategic expansion, or then we can have our legislation coming in to enumerate some of these rights and impose some of these strict liabilities as the Europeans have done. But we actually have a framework for this in a way. We have a motherboard of framework, and if there's any data company that uses your data in the wrong manner, the courts in Ghana are going to give you any sort of justice that you need. So yeah. we should be concerned, but if ever your rights are breached, just know that the courts in Ghana are going to enforce your right.
Okay, thank you very much, Kizito, for sharing your perspective, your legal perspective. And it's been a wonderful discussion. You've actually resurrected one of the big debates in the internet governance community. You know, some of these things we need new laws, or are the old laws sufficient, etc., etc. I think that would have to have this debate properly in the future. So for us to close off, I'll just like to give the opportunity to our speakers, 30 seconds each, if you have any concluding remark. Derek, and then Emmanuel.
I actually never thought of a concluding remark until now, but then if there's one thing I want you to take away from this is you should just build stuff. Build stuff that only you can build, and those stuff are things that are in your domain of expertise. If you can find a good intersection with data, fine. Else, do something approximately equal.
Yeah, I think we have we are in a very quite important moment in our lives as people in the world, and we have as a science community to possibly help in achieving most of the things that we need to get done. One of the things that I want to always be we need to remind ourselves of is the call to duty. This call to duty means that for every opportunity that we have, we should be able to utilize them to benefit others. And that is why we have communities like this. I mean, it is important that we make use of these opportunities and then try to help society solve problems. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Derek, for your wonderful presentation and for your concluding remarks. I'd like to say a big thank you to all of you for joining us for a wonderful session today. Had a robust discussion about how to get into data analytics, as well as looking at how to practically get into it, why data analytics is important, the applications of data, what kinds of policies and guidelines should we follow, and finally, even looking at the legal aspect of it. So thank you, and I hope that you join us for our future program. I think we have one last main event for the rest of the year, which will be coming up next month, which will be a science cafe, talking again about research and innovation in the Ghanaian context. So for now, I'll officially end the call. And then for those people who want to still hang around, ask further questions, engage in further discussions, and socialize, you are welcome to keep going at it for the meantime. Thank you so much.